48 below zero. Nora Voss should have been a body. By the third night of the interior Alaska cold snap, her stove had been dead for hours. Her water bucket had frozen solid, and the frost on her bedroom wall was thick enough to scrape with a knife. But when a worried neighbor finally reached her cabin, he didn't find a frozen corpse. He found steam lifting off the snow beneath her floorboards, as if something under the house had woken up hot and angry in the middle of the permafrost. The country outside Delta Junction can look beautiful from a distance. Black spruce, white flats, ridges of blue ice under a pale sun. But in January, beauty out there is just another way the land lies to you. It is not empty. It is waiting. A snapped belt, a dead battery, a twisted ankle, one mistake with your fuel estimate, and the cold takes over the math. Nora had lived on that ridge for 36 years. She was 72, widowed, stubborn, and almost impossible to move once she made up her mind. Her husband, Emil, had built the cabin himself in the mid-'80s, hauling timber, anchoring the pilings, hand-fitting the walls, and joking that if the grid ever died for good, at least they'd die on ground they understood. Emil had been a geologic surveyor before he came north full-time, the kind of man who kept notebooks on soil layers, drainage, frost heave, and rock color the way other men kept fishing stories. When he died of a ruptured aneurysm 6 winters earlier, everybody assumed Nora would finally come into town. She didn't. She kept the trapline maps, kept the pantry rotation, kept the generator patched together with parts 2 decades too old. And every September, she ran the same winter ritual. Count the heating oil drums, split the birch and tamarack, restack the dry pile, check the stovepipe, seal the window gaps, and pray the season would stay within the range of what wood and caution could handle. That winter, she had planned well. Then family happened. Her grandson Levi showed up 12 days before the cold snap, driving a half-broken pickup with no rear plate and eyes that never settled in one place for long. He said he needed cash. Then he said he needed food. Then he said he just needed to sleep. Nora knew the pattern, knew the smell of pills and panic on him, knew the lie was always still deciding what shape it wanted to be. She let him drink coffee, let him eat, let him talk around the truth. The next morning, while she rode into town to collect her pension check and refill 2 propane bottles, Levi backed up to the woodshed and stole almost everything he could lift. Split birch, dry tamarack, boxed fire starters, 2 jerry cans of stove diesel, and Emil's emergency tote. By the time Nora got back, the shed looked punched hollow. She didn't scream, call troopers, didn't sit down. She just counted what was left. Not enough. She had maybe a day and a half of real heat, if the weather stayed normal. It didn't. The cold came down like a hammer. Barometer dropped fast. Then the wind shifted north and started sawing through the spruce. The radio stations turned from farm reports to warnings. School in town shut down. Diesel gelled in truck lines. And men who had lived there all their lives started using the careful voice they usually saved for river ice and wildfire. By sundown the first day, it was 28 below. By midnight, it was 39 below. By dawn the next morning, the wind chill had dropped into the kind of range where exposed skin stopped being skin and became a countdown. Nora tightened the cabin to the point it felt sealed, hung blankets over the hallway, closed off the back room, ran the stove hard, then hard again, burning fuel faster than she could afford, because the other option was to watch the indoor temperature fall through survival and into physics. By the second evening, half the wood was gone. By the third morning, all the rational plans were gone with it. She broke down the cedar bench Emile had made for the porch mudroom, fed it to the stove, then the 2 kitchen stools, then a warped cabinet door she had been meaning to fix for 15 years and never did. Then she took a hammer to an old crate of field journals too damaged by mice to read, and burned those too, though she winced when the pages curled. Her world got smaller every hour. Less furniture, less fuel, less time. Paper flared bright but useless. Soft wood vanished too fast. The cast-iron stove kept asking for more. By afternoon, the interior walls had gone so cold, a lace of white crystals started creeping across them from the corners inward. The metal latch on the sink cupboard burned her skin 1 second and froze it the next. Her dishwater skinned over with ice before she could finish washing 1 cup. She put on another sweater, then snow pants over wool pants, then Emile's old canvas bibs, then a fur hat indoors, fingerless gloves, 2 pairs of socks inside boots she never unlaced. It didn't matter. Cold that deep doesn't negotiate. It presses from every angle, up through the floor, through the window seams, out of the breath in your chest. It empties a room 1 degree at a time until the room no longer belongs to people. Late on the second night, the stove finally went soft. Not fully out, not yet, but soft. The glow in the firebox dropped from orange to a tired red, to the kind of color that makes a person start calculating stupid options. Nora went outside with a headlamp and an axe, hoping maybe she'd missed a stack near the back fence. The wind hit her so hard she had to brace 1 hand against the wall just to stay upright. The yard wasn't a yard anymore. It was sculpted white violence, crusted hard on top and swallowed her leg when they broke. Air so cold it felt granular in her nose. Darkness that looked polished. She found nothing usable, nothing dry, nothing she could split and haul before her fingers failed. She stumbled back inside with her eyelashes frozen together. The cabin temperature dropped below freezing before dawn. The tea kettle turned to a block of ice on the stove. One of the mason jars on the pantry shelf burst with a small, sharp crack that sounded obscene in the silence. She dragged her mattress into the front room and laid it near the stove, then ringed herself with blankets, old parkas, a reflective emergency sheet, and the sleeping bag Emile used on caribou trips 20 years earlier. The room still felt like a freezer with walls. Hypothermia does not announce itself like a movie. It comes in stages that feel almost reasonable. First, the shaking, violent enough to make her jaw chatter against her own teeth. Then the clumsiness. She dropped a mug and watched it break and felt strangely detached from the inconvenience. Then the fatigue. Heavy, sweet, persuasive fatigue. The kind that tells you to stop solving, stop moving, stop fighting. Just rest a little. Close your eyes. You can think better in a minute. Nora knew that voice. She had heard it once before, when a skidoo rolled through overflow and trapped her and Emile on the Tanana Flats overnight. Emile had slapped her face and forced hot broth between her teeth until dawn. Now there was no Emile, no broth, no second pair of hands. Just the sound of the wind worrying at the siding and the hard creep of numbness up through her calves. She lay there watching the ceiling blur. Her left hand had stopped feeling like part of her. Her shivering slowed. That frightened her more than the shaking had. And then, through the fog, she felt the floor under her shoulder. Not just cold, wrong. Because beneath the front room, under the center of the cabin, Emile had once shown her something he made her swear never to mention if he was alive. The memory came back in fragments. Emile kneeling beside an open trench in summer. Black-brown bands in the earth. A grin she hadn't trusted. If the fuel ever truly runs out, Nor, and I mean truly, there's one thing under this cabin that can outlast a blizzard. At the time, she thought he was half joking. Now, with her lips turning blue and her thoughts breaking apart, the meaning landed all at once. Not wood, not oil. Below the floor. Nora rolled onto her side and nearly blacked out from the effort. She crawled to Emile's desk, pulling with her elbows when her knees stopped cooperating. The first drawer was frozen. The second jammed halfway. The third opened with a shriek. Inside were survey maps, old receipts, a coil of wire, and Emile's black notebook wrapped in waxed paper. She found the page by accident because her hand was too numb to sort properly. A cross-section sketch, cabin pilings, permafrost layer, then a dark seam marked in Emile's cramped block letters. Lignite lens, shallow. Dry enough to take flame if drafted correctly. Nora stared at it until the meaning punched through the fog. A coal seam, not deep, not commercial, just a strange remnant trapped in the bluff, close enough to the surface that Emile had found it while cutting footings, and close enough to keep secret from anybody who might decide the land was worth taking. He had built over it, not to mine it, to hide it, and maybe, one day, to use it. The pry bar was in the mudroom. Getting to it felt like crawling across a frozen lake with someone sitting on her chest. She dragged it back, laid on the boards to catch her breath, then drove the curved end into the seam between two planks and pulled. Nothing. She pulled again. The first board jumped loose with a crack. Then another. Then another. By the time she had opened a ragged rectangle in the center of the room, her palms were skinned open, and the edges of her nails were bleeding where frozen wood had split them back. Under the planks was packed dirt and old insulation stuffed between the joists. She clawed through it like an animal. 3 feet over, the stove went dead. The room turned truly silent. Nora kept digging. She hit frozen soil first, then gravel, then a dense, dark layer that glittered dull under the beam of her headlamp. She scraped more clear. Black-brown stone, dirty, brittle, carbon-rich. The memory sharpened again. Emile standing in the summer trench, boot nudging the seam. Not pretty coal, not hard coal, but if you get enough heat into it and enough draw over it, it'll hold. Nora laughed once when she saw it. The sound came out cracked and ugly. Then she crawled back for what little fuel Levi had not managed to steal. A half-can of diesel, the broken chair legs, a stack of dry cardboard, and Emile's old cutting torch. She worked in fragments. Pour, rest. Carry, rest. Stack, rest. Her body kept trying to quit. She kept refusing. She threw cardboard and split fragments into the hole, poured diesel over them until the smell made her eyes water, lowered the torch, and lit the mess. The first flames were weak and filthy. Then they caught. Then they licked against the exposed seam. Nothing. Nothing. Then a strange cracking sound came from below, as if something trapped in the earth had started opening one tiny fracture at a time. Nora held the torch there until her wrist trembled violently. Minutes passed, then longer. At last, a deeper glow appeared under the black surface. Dim at first, then redder, then spreading in veins. The seam did not burst into flame the way wood does. It awakened. Slow, stubborn, ugly, but alive. Heat rose in a cautious sheet. She fed it more broken wood, then more. Aft began almost invisibly, air slipping in through the crawlspace vents, sliding under the floor, feeding the burn. Emile had known. Of course he had known. The cabin wasn't just on pilings by accident. He had created a throat for air. Within an hour, the room was no longer killing her. Within 2, she had stripped off 1 coat. Within 3, the place felt feverish. Outside, Wade Mercer was staring at silence. Wade lived just under 2 miles away as the Raven flew. closer to 4 by the trail once snow buried the low ground. He was 51, broad-shouldered, divorced, and the kind of man who checked weather updates the way other people checked sports scores. For 2 days, he had tried raising Nora on CB and VHF. Nothing. Nora always answered eventually, even if it was just to say, "Stop fussing, Wade." By the third afternoon, the silence had curdled into something heavier. He remembered seeing her wood reserves look thin a week earlier, remembered almost offering help, and deciding not to insult her. He remembered that mistake now. At 3:40 p.m., with darkness already pushing down through the trees, Wade loaded a med kit, a thermos of hot broth, rescue rope, spare mitts, a compact oxygen bottle, and a winter-rated bivy sack into his sled pack. The snow machine couldn't make the ridge through the drifts, so he took snowshoes for the last stretch and started walking. The cold felt weaponized. Every inhale shaved the back of his throat raw. Ice built around the edge of his face mask. His eyelashes crusted white. The trip took nearly 3 hours. By the time he reached the edge of Nora's clearing, full night had settled in. He killed his lamp for a second and listened. No engine, no generator hum, no dog, no stove pop. Nothing. Then he saw it. Not smoke from the chimney. The chimney was dead black against the stars. The light was lower, orange, pulsing through the crawlspace vents under the cabin. Wade stopped so abruptly he almost dropped face first into the drift. The snow around the pilings was collapsing into wet holes. Thin tendrils of steam corkscrewed up from the foundation line. The underside of the cabin was glowing like a forge hidden under a dock. He moved closer. The smell hit him next. Not cedar smoke, not birch. Mineral. Bitter, sulfuric, almost oily. His first thought was electrical fire. His second thought was worse. The floor's gone hot. He dropped his pack, took the short rescue axe from his belt, climbed the porch in 3 hard steps, and slammed his shoulder into the front door. The latch split. Heat hit him with enough force to feel physical. He reeled backward, eyes watering instantly. It was like opening an oven the size of a room. Inside, the cabin looked looted by fire and madness. Furniture gone. Rugs shoved against the walls. A rectangle of floorboards ripped open in the center of the front room. And beside that hole, sitting in a metal camp chair with bare feet tucked under her and sweat shining on her forehead, was Nora Voss, in a thin thermal shirt and long underwear. Black soot streaked up her forearms like she'd climbed out of a mine. She turned her head slowly toward him, annoyed more than surprised. "Close the damn door," she said hoarsely. "You'll change the draw." Wade stared at her, then at the hole, then back at her. "Nora, what did you do?" He shoved the door shut and stepped farther in. The floor gave under his boot with a sticky softness that made his skin crawl. The varnish on the planks was bubbling. The room smelled of scorched resin and hot metal. He reached the opening and looked down. 10 feet below the cabin, in a trench she had hacked through frozen ground, an exposed wall of dark earth was glowing a violent cherry red. Not all of it, not evenly, but enough to throw off brutal, radiant heat. A length of stovepipe and scrap ducting had been jammed into the opening and angled toward a rear vent, trying to force exhaust away. The setup was crude and failing. Wade stepped back instinctively. What is that? Nora took a sip from an enamel mug with a hand that trembled only when it stopped moving. Emil's secret, she said. He found a lignite pocket when he cut the pilings, kept his mouth shut, built over it, said if winter ever stopped playing fair, we had one last card under the floor. Wade looked back down into the trench and understood just enough to become frightened for a whole new reason. Lignite. Low-grade coal. Dirty burn. Lots of gas. Enough heat to save a life. Also enough fumes and radiant load to cook the joists from below if a person was reckless or desperate enough to light it inside a wooden structure. Nora had been both. How long has that been going? She looked at the wall clock. Long enough. The answer landed badly. Wade swept his lamp across the ceiling. Heat shimmered in layers. Near the rafters, the air looked greasy. Trapped exhaust and superheated gas were banking overhead. He lowered the beam and saw white threads of smoke feathering up through gaps in the floor around the opening. Not open flame. Worse. Pyrolysis. The joists were baking into charcoal before his eyes. Nora, he said, this house is failing. She gave him a flat look. This house is the reason I'm not dead. He crouched beside her and took the mug from her hand. Her skin was burning hot and too dry. Her lips were cracked. She had moved from freezing toward heat injury so far she no longer even looked cold. 40 below outside. Heat stroke in here. You don't understand, he said. You beat the cold, fine. But now you're sitting over a burn cavity under timber joists in a sealed room full of poison. A sharp crack exploded from the back corner. Wade snapped his head around. One of the support members beneath the kitchen side had just split. The floor dipped. An inch, maybe 2. Enough. Nora heard it too. Her eyes changed for the first time. Wade didn't waste another breath. He tore open his sled pack and yanked out the bivy sack, then the insulated overbag, then his outer parka. What are you doing? Leaving. I'm not walking out of Emil's cabin. You're not walking anywhere. Another cracking report, then a low groan from under the boards, deep and ugly, the sound of wood fibers giving up after too much heat. Wade pulled Nora up by both forearms. She tried to brace and nearly folded. Her legs had no spring left. He wrapped the bivvy around her lower body, shoved her arms into his parka sleeves, zipped it to her throat, and cinched the hood tight enough to protect her face from the thermal shock waiting outside. She hit his shoulder once with a weak fist. He took it. Then he turned and hauled her into a fireman's carry. The weight drove pain into his lower back immediately. Didn't matter. He took one step. The floor answered with a dull, splintering pop. Then another. Then the center section in front of the trench dropped half an inch. The cabin was done. Wade lunged for the door. Behind him, the opening under the front room widened with a bursting roar as another joist failed and a section of floor sheared away into the glow below. Air rushed through the new gap. The burn deepened instantly, inhaling like a living thing finally given room to breathe. The walls ticked. The floor rolled under his boots. He hit the doorway at a dead run and jumped the porch stairs instead of taking them. The cold outside struck like a weapon. Even through his sweat-soaked layers and the superheated air still trapped in his clothes, the sub-zero night bit down hard enough to make his lungs seize. He landed in deep powder, rolled with Nora wrapped against him, then fought upright and dragged her clear of the porch. Behind them, the cabin made a sound no house should ever make. A long wooden bellow, followed by the crash of its own spine giving way. He kept dragging. 20 yards, 30, 50. He didn't stop until they reached the tree line and he could finally turn. The cabin sagged inward around the central breach, then folded into itself in stages. Roof first, then the front wall, then the porch. Every dry timber Emil had hand-cut, every shelf Nora had filled, every curtain, every notebook, every repaired hinge and old coffee mug, all of it dropped into the open burn beneath and vanished in a rush of sparks and furnace light. For a few impossible seconds, the clearing looked volcanic. Orange core below, white wilderness around it, steam and ash climbing into a black Alaskan sky. Nora made a noise Wade had never heard from her before. Not a scream, not weeping. Something quieter and worse. The sound of watching a whole life burn in one place. Wade dropped to both knees in the snow, chest heaving, and checked her face. Cold had pulled her out of the heat delirium. She was conscious now, shaking again. Good sign. Terrible feeling. Better than the alternative. "Stay with me," he said. She turned her head toward the inferno. "He built it strong." Wade looked at the burning pit where the cabin had been. "He built it to give you one more chance." The walk back nearly killed them both. Wade cut spruce boughs with numb hands and lashed a drag litter together with rope and trapline cord. He got Nora onto it, wrapped the bivvy tighter, added his spare mitts at her neck, and started hauling. The heat from the burn faded fast once they cleared the open ground. Then the real Alaska came back. The trail was no trail at all. Just dark timber, buried stumps, drifted hollows, and the brutal arithmetic of pulling dead weight through chest-high snow while your own muscles started to cramp from overwork and cold. Wade stopped every few minutes to force broth between Nora's lips. Sometimes she answered when he spoke. Sometimes she didn't. His right cheek went numb first, then 2 fingers inside his glove. Twice he thought about setting up the bivvy and waiting for daylight. Twice he looked at the air temperature on his wrist unit and kept moving, because waiting in that cold was just a slower form of surrender. They reached his cabin a little after 2 o'clock in the morning. He got her inside, stripped off the outer layers that smelled like smoke and hot pitch, checked her breathing, checked her pulse, checked her pupils, set her near, not against the stove, and started the hard, boring work that actually saves people. Warm, sweet liquid in tiny amounts, dry layers, gradual rewarming, monitoring for confusion, waiting through the parts that feel too quiet. Nora slept for almost a full day and a half. When she woke, the first thing she asked was whether the burn had reached the spruce. It hadn't. Snowpack and frozen ground had contained it. Barely. The cold snap finally broke on the 5th day. Not warm, just survivable. The kind of 10 above morning locals describe as a relief with a straight face. State troopers and a highway department loader finally managed to clear enough of the access road for welfare checks on the ridge cabins. They arrived expecting frozen bodies, carbon monoxide deaths, maybe a medical evac. Instead, they found Wade and Nora on his porch under blankets, sharing instant coffee like 2 people too tired to explain anything properly. The official inspection of Nora's property became a story before it became paperwork. There was almost nothing left of the cabin itself. Some twisted stove iron, nails, blackened hardware, a collapsed ring of pilings, and in the center, a wide, ugly subsidence hole still breathing heat from below. The lignite seam had caught deep enough that it kept smoldering under the frozen bluff long after the structure was gone. By March, snow around the scar melted weeks earlier than the rest of the ridge. By late April, a raw, bright patch of ground showed through, while the surrounding timber still held winter in the shade. For years after, people passing the old Voss property talked about the warm spot on the hill where frost vanished first. Nora never rebuilt there. She moved into a small, dry cabin outside town that first spring, and hated every inch of it. Levi was picked up months later on an unrelated charge. He never learned how close his theft had come to killing the last person in the family who still opened the door for him. As for Emil's notebooks, most of them went down with the house. But Wade kept one page Nora had managed to shove into her shirt before he dragged her out. The cross-section sketch of the cabin over the dark seam, with Emil's cramped note in the margin. Last resort only. If this ever saves us, it will probably take the house too. That turned out to be true. Nora survived because the man who loved her had hidden one terrible option under their floor. And because, on the night the cold finally cornered her, she was still mean enough to use it. Most people think survival is about strength. Out there, it's often about memory. Remembering where the fuel is, remembering what the land is holding, remembering one instruction at the exact moment your body wants to go still. In a winter designed to erase her, Nora Voss stayed alive by tearing open the heart of her own cabin and lighting the earth beneath it. And for one savage night in interior Alaska, the only warm place on the ridge was the one place already starting to burn from below.